Well, welcome everyone. I am glad to see everyone here. My name is Nick Pape. I am a member of the admissions team here at Adolescents, and we are hosting our Humanities elevator pitches today. So we have a great team of students here who are going to be sharing their projects with us all today. So we're going to be going through and starting. I'm sorry. We're going to be going through and starting today with Emma Kim.
Hi.
So Emma, welcome to us, and we'd love to hear from you.
Perfect, thank you. All righty. Let me share my screen and we can get started. Sorry, my computer is a tad slow. Hold on, apologies. All right, while this is loading, and my Polygens project is called Expanding Perspectives, Redefining the American Dream. Now, when I was younger, when I would play board games or watch movies, I'd always pick the character who I thought looked most like me. Now, I have some examples here. You see Silversmith, Snow White, but there were always something a little bit off. I was never able to find a character that really represented who I was. I was never really able to find like an Asian character that I could relate to. Then I started reading Harry Potter, and immediately I thought, oh my gosh, here's a character who was just like me, that I can see myself on the screen. And then I started reading a little bit more. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Cho Chang, but she really kind of plays into the stereotypical Asian archetype of a smart, quiet, more submissive character. And when I started to realize this, I realized that there was no one who really represented who I was in popular media. I'd like to share this quote that I heard when I was interviewing Mr. Rockley, who's a teacher at my school, to analyze the extent of accurate racial and religious representation. The goal is to have windows and mirrors, mirrors for people to look at themselves and windows for people to peer into the lives of others. Now, when I was doing my senior elective, in which I conducted an investigation at my school to study the extent and the accuracy of racial and religious representation in my curriculum, I realized that it was really lacking. And in one of my interviews with my English department chair, she suggested that if I was dissatisfied with the current state of the curriculum, I should make one for myself. And that is exactly what I decided to do. My curriculum's goals are to introduce modern-day topics to students in a way that is engaging and encourages additional self-driven curiosity. I want to illuminate different voices in the literary, cinematic, and overall artistic community and expose children to them from a young age. I want to educate students on the other communities that live side by side their own and ensure accurate representation of these communities. And I want to know, how can we track progress? How can we apply the curiosity that these students are fostering and turn that into activism and to agitate their sense of curiosity and of activism and make them question authority? Now, here are some examples of some of the media that I've included in my curriculum. My goal was to include a variety of different mediums and media so that each student could find something that they truly resonated with and were interested in exploring. Now, each module in the curriculum is broken down into 7 steps. We have learning outcomes, we have the required core texts, we have headlighting questions for each module, we have media-specific questions for each text or movie or video that they may encounter, and we have additional text for further exploration. If a certain module really resonates with a certain student, then they can continue to explore deeper and deeper into that module. We have deep dives into particularly impactful sources, and we have culminating questions. Now, to give you some examples of the modules, we have the LGBTQ community, the immigrant experience, physical disabilities, the Native American experience, socioeconomic status, and social justice and activism. Now, these modules are completely self-guided. Students can pick and choose which one to start with first, where to go next, in an effort to really have them make this curriculum their own and to empower them in their own learning. So to give you an example, this is a sample learning objective from my economic inequality module. So these are objectives that students can metaphorically tick off and to keep in mind as they continue growing and learning through these modules. Here are some examples of media-specific questions. So they will target text specifically and reference them specifically in their in the questions and analysis that these students participate in. Some examples of headlining questions. So overall broad questions that students will think about as they go through the texts. And this is an example of a deep dive. So in my Native American module, students will read about a Native American boy named Channy Wetjack, and he unfortunately passed away, but there is an amazing video and podcast about it. So this is an example of a deep dive to really investigate sources and narratives. So that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned a little something about my project. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. I think that was a wonderful share. I would love to know from you, what was the most challenging element of completing your project for you?
I think it was really just the masses and masses of source material I kind of had to go through. I read every single book and watched every single movie that I included in my curriculum, which as a person who loves to read was super fun, but it was also a little bit hard to kind of discern what I wanted to include as required text and what I didn't, because I encountered so many fabulous books and movies and things like that written by so many fabulous, amazing, gifted people. So it was so hard to pick and choose what to include in my curriculum.
Wonderful. And how do you feel it impacted your perspective on your subject?
I would say I really didn't know too much about a lot of the modules that I chose. The Native American one is an example. I really had no idea where to start with that. But then as I continued to read and learn more, I felt it definitely stirred feelings of frustration because I had no idea about a lot of the injustice that was going on. So it definitely agitated my psyche a little bit, but it was very rewarding.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing. It's amazing the things that we can gain insight into through study like this. So I'm really, really thrilled that you were able to share with us today.
Thank you.
Well, our next presenter is going to be Lassya Raju. So I welcome you to the floor to share with us your project.
For the past 2 years, the world has become subdued by an infectious disease that needs no introduction, COVID-19. As COVID spread further and further, information about it seemed to follow in its wake. However, throughout the world's plight to end COVID, one group has been far too ignored: refugees. Refugees are people who have fled their country due to war, violence, or persecution, being placed in a vulnerable situation. Unfortunately, as COVID-19 has progressed, refugees have been experiencing disproportionate effects of COVID-19 as compared to the general population. My name is Lassya Raju, and for my research, I focused on the vulnerable position that they're in and the effects that they've been experiencing, wanting to bring awareness to the circumstances and the vulnerable situation to how they go through and finding ways to solve it. First, I'll be talking about the ways that refugee camps have affected the spread of COVID-19. When refugees arrive in a new country, they're typically placed in camps that allow them to receive aid and resources as well as a living situation. However, these camps are oftentimes overcrowded and unhygienic, only becoming vessels for COVID to spread further. Even before the pandemic, these camps have been reported to spread disease of measles and hepatitis A. Countries, on the other hand, while ignoring these risks, have been utilizing the pandemic as a way to enact border closures, eluding international law. During times of global crises, donors also frequently cut aid, causing it to become even more harder to repair these conditions. A possible solution for these conditions can be found through a technique called spatial subdividing, in which the camps are divided into sections, spreading them out apart by 1 kilometer squared, which has been found to reduce the curve and the spread of COVID-19 within these camps. In order to receive the funding to implement these techniques, it is imperative for the general population to realize the importance of mitigating the spread of COVID refugees. Without intervention, COVID spreading within refugee populations can further strain the hospital system or spread into the general population. Unfortunately, simply treating the conditions of refugees camps is not enough. Another problem that our research lies in how, due to COVID-19 restrictions present around the world, humanitarian organizations have been having a harder time reaching refugee populations. Consequently, there have been an exponential growth in child labor and human trafficking victimizing refugees. Domestic violence, forced marriage, and sexual violence have shown to worsen throughout the pandemic. In fact, since lockdown, refugee camps have been enacted. Reporting of gender-based violence cases has dropped by 50%, despite the drastic increase in its prevalence, which makes social service groups even more important. In order to help solve this, the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, has found that a way to improve social service groups can be found through integrating the services that are provided for refugees into ones that are already provided for the general population, allowing refugees to integrate more readily into the general population and for resources to be better dispersed among refugee populations. Finally, the last section of my research lies in a term that has been noted for its effect on the general population: health literacy. Both healthcare professionals and refugee populations have been reported to believe that the language barriers between them have been hindering the treatment. A lack of health literacy causes the inability to differentiate between reality and fiction, which can cause hysteria and misinformation to govern one's actions, being harmful to both the individual and the general population. Due to language barriers, health literacy within refugee populations is worse than the general population. Only 23% have been fully vaccinated, and many refugees have been unwilling to receive any vaccines or preventative measures due to the combination of a lack of health literacy as well as a lack of understanding about these measures. In order to combat this, healthcare professionals can utilize a method called the teach-back method, in which the patient repeats back the information being presented to them back to the professional. Then the professional is able to assess how well they understood the information being presented to them and redeliver this information if necessary. This information has showed a positive results on patient satisfaction, perceptions, and acknowledgement, as well as disease self-management and knowledge. In implementing this method, refugees will be less prone to misinformation and more understanding about their health, allowing them to have a much better healthcare overall. These problems have been ignored for far too long. If another health crisis were to happen, it is likely that refugees and similar populations would be drastically affected if we do not fix this problem now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. So I have a question to present to you here. You've got covered a subject that really looks at humanitarian issues. It has a lot of altruism towards people. I'm actually really wondering what your next steps are going to be now that you've completed the project.
Well, mainly I'm just trying to find if there's ways that I could spread out the information more, because I think, especially because in my position as being young and not really having that many resources, it would be helpful for other people to know so that we could all join and someone in a better position could help them more efficiently.
Wonderful. So are you going to be then expanding on this in your future studies and in your future pathway to try and help people on these kind of issues long term?
Yes, that's the plan.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for presenting to us today. I'm going to bring up our next presenter, and that's going to be Meghna. So Meghna, I would love you to join us and present your project.
Hello, sorry, just give me a minute to pull up this screen real quick. Okay, so my project was about the influence of Asian Indian ethnic as well as gender identity on mental health during the COVID-19 lockdown. So my name is Meghna Kalagara, and I chose this project particularly because I've always had a general liking towards mental health. So I knew I wanted to write a research paper regarding that. And then I decided to do something that was kind of something that I could find myself relating to, which is what this is. So for some overall information about mental health during the COVID-19 lockdown in general, adolescent girls are typically more likely to develop mental health issues versus adolescent boys. In a lot of studies that I saw, the main thing that came across was acceptance and support by peers was something very rather more important to girls versus boys, and it affects their mental health more than it does for boys. So specifically, a lot of girls, or during the COVID-19 lockdown, when we were placed into a sudden social, basically isolation, we weren't allowed to have that acceptance and support and the social networking that we were usually used to. And also during a very critical time in a lot of adolescent girls' lives is when this lockdown occurred. So certain environmental factors that make up our brain, like chemistry, how we work and deal with our peers, was suddenly taken away from us. And one example of that is during the lockdown, one example of how mental health was exacerbated, specifically anxiety disorders, is the actual fear of contracting COVID-19 itself. A lot of people worried about actually contracting the disease or passing it on to their family members, perhaps an elderly family member who could have a higher chance of passing away, as well as the fact that we still had to continue on with our school, online or in person, whatever it may be. All of these issues were compounded during the COVID-19 lockdown. Now, specifically with Asian Indian girls, there's a lot of cultural factors that also play a role in these lifetimes. So typically in Asian Indian culture, especially in the past, women were considered to be more of a support for men, to basically stay home and take care of them so that the men can go out and obtain successful lives and jobs to make them successful. And like I said, this was something that happened a lot previously in the past, but even now it's still a pretty common occurrence in a lot of households, even if it's not as necessarily serious as it used to be. A lot of the general values are still there, so they're still passed on to adolescent girls nowadays who face the added pressure of also obtaining a good education, which was something that wasn't there for them before. So like I said, a lot of these roles might include just expected to keep up the household, take care of chores, jobs, whatever it may be, along with the fact that now they were in a confined space with their parents and siblings for an even longer period of time, which again just further compounded this stress. And then, like I said, the general anxiety and mental health issues that Asian Indian girls previously faced were further compounded because of these certain issues. So in a lot of the research that I found, I discovered that there have been some ideas and stuff about measuring the extent to which these mental health issues and anxiety issues have affected Asian Indian adolescent girls. But I believe that there still needs to be a lot more future research done on actual measures that can be taken to help these Asian Indian adolescent females as well as to the extent to which these intervention measures can actually help with their issues. And that's all I have for today. So.
Thank you so much for sharing. So I love the fact that you're looking at future issues that you want to address in this field. Is this what you're anticipating doing for your future career path and university?
Yeah, I'm hoping, I want to major in psychology in college, so I'm hoping I can actually maybe do something more with this, because a lot of what I decided to do research on was some of my own issues, or like, you know, family, friends issues that I've seen. So I think that's something I definitely want to go forward with, because I know it'll help out a lot of people in the future.
Wonderful. Well, with the connection that you have with your subject matter, I'm really curious, what was the most unexpected thing you learned through this process?
I think I guess it was kind of unexpected to me, even though it necessarily shouldn't have been. I don't know, but one thing I found out when I was researching was a lot of research articles that I found were specifically based on Asian Indian adolescents. And a lot of them, one of the articles that I found reported them basically saying they feared being at home for that period of time because they didn't want to be stuck at their homes with their parents. And I guess it was kind of unexpected how much it kind of shocked me in a sense, because on one hand, I felt like a part of me felt like that, but still reading about it and seeing so many people relate to that was the part that was kind of unexpected for me. And I don't want to have to continue to see things like that. So I want to be able to like help those kinds of situations in the future.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for presenting to us today. We really appreciate your efforts. I would love to call now on our next presenter, and that's going to be Meredith Ho.
Hi, give me a minute to pull up the slides. Okay. Hi, I'm Meredith and I am from Los Angeles. So today I'll be talking about my research into how long it takes music to affect people's emotions. Music is all around us and we make emotional connections to us. There are three primary genres that Americans are exposed through movies, radios, and in stores. The three genres are pop, country music, and rap. Past study has shown that a student's heart rate increases after listening to rock or pop music. In contrast, students' heart rates who listen to classical music decrease. So how long should we listen to music? For what outcome? We hypothesize that if the subject listens to 10 minutes of upbeat music, their emotions will be improved by having a positive mindset and a surge of motivation. I designed an experiment in which 10 participants between the ages of 10 to 80 listened to 5, 10, and 15 minutes of upbeat music. The participants filled out the discrete emotions questionnaire, which contains a scale between 1, not at all, to 7, an extreme amount. Emotions are stated below, and the participants would have to write what they're feeling before and after each session. So the results. Session 1, 5 minutes of listening to upbeat music has improved the participants' emotion, as you can see in figure 1. We compared the data with that of the 10 and 15-minute sessions. The 5-minute session had the most drastic results. The participants had a strong reaction to the music from early on, and they didn't have enough time to return to their normal emotional state. A 10 or 15-minute listening session had similar emotional changes as a 5-minute session, but were slightly less drastic in figure 2 and 3. The fact that the changes in emotions are less extreme than the 5-minute session suggests that the participants had more time to return to homeostasis. When they filled out the questionnaire, the participants might not experience the same level of stimulation as in the first 5 minutes. It is shown that the 5, 10, and 15-minute sessions had close results for most of the positive emotions, except relaxation. Relaxation has the highest increase in the 15-minute session as shown in figure 5, graph B. It had an increase of an average of 0.575 points. As for the negative emotions, anxiety had the most impact as it had a significant decrease. Even though happiness looks like it was improved, the change in it was not statistically significant, as it had a p-value of 0.6315 in Figure 5, Graph A. This experiment displayed that music's emotional effect did not vary by amount of time. As long as a participant listens to music, their emotions will experience a similar degree of change. These findings reject our hypothesis that 10 minutes of listening to upbeat music will improve the participants' emotions. In conclusion, we find that my study could be applied to many more situations in our daily life, as well as medical and business fields. Therapists and psychiatrists could use this information to know what kind of music is suitable for their patients to lower their anxiety and stress, as well as providing relaxation at the same time, knowing how long they should play music for. In addition, businesses would know how long it takes upbeat music to attract a customer's interest in purchasing. Thank you for listening.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Meredith. So you have some interesting experiences in your work here. I would love to know, first of all, what was your experience like working directly with subjects and to gather the data that you gathered?
It was definitely like a bit difficult at first, because when I had to like adapt to like each participant's like schedule and like have a 3 consecutive day that they're free to like to do this experiment. And sometimes on day 3, like the participants would get bored of the experiment, and there have been like some errors in the data, but overall it turned out pretty well.
Okay, wonderful. So it sounds like you're aware of some of the things that you might want to control for if you dig deeper into the experiment in the future. Were there any things that you thought could be confounding factors that you didn't take into account before that you're now looking at going, maybe next time we need to address this one particular factor?
Maybe it's like the age group, because like the participants are like my family members, and it's and it has a really big age gap, like it's from 10 to 80, and sometimes like each person has like different music taste, and that might affect the results. And also like, yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay. It sounds like you had some great questions that come out of that, though. That are you thinking of following some of those pathways down for future research?
Yeah, definitely. I maybe in the future I'll continue to investigate like how like music affect people's emotions by like not how long, but like how our brains works. So yeah, should be like pretty interesting.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for presenting today. I'm going to call our next presenter to center stage, and that's going to be Carson.
Hello. Okay, so my research project is about global government action on climate change. Climate change has become a significant issue in our society over the last few years. I've noticed examples in my personal life, like I live in California. A couple of weeks ago, it was over 100 degrees, and the following week it was frigid and rained for the first time in about 2 years. And extreme weather patterns like that have been happening all over the world, such as flooding in Pakistan and the hurricane in Puerto Rico. However, most people don't actually do very much to contribute to climate change, and most of the impact of climate change comes from governments and large corporations. I wanted to examine the impact that these groups have on climate change around the world in many countries. I was inspired to create this project by my interest in global policy as well as my support for the environment. These are 2 things that I'm passionate about, and this project really helped me connect my interests in them. Doing research for this project, I chose 9 countries from a variety of places around the world, as well as economic backgrounds. After that, I divided them into 3 categories. The first The first group includes the US, Japan, and France, and they're some of the largest powers in the world who have a lot of impact over the global economy. The second group includes China, India, and Brazil, and they're industrial countries that still contribute to climate change, but are not as economically dominant as countries like the first group. The third group are the most impacted countries with the littlest influence, and I chose the Bahamas, Indonesia, and Nigeria to represent that category. When I researched these countries, I researched three categories: air pollution, water pollution, and government action. I chose air pollution, water pollution because I think they give a good representation of what the country's climate situation is. And I chose government action because it's important to see what the government is doing to fix the issues. After I was done researching, I looked for similarities between the countries to see if there were any connecting ideas between them. I noticed that countries all over the world are affected by climate change in both similar and different ways. For example, most of the countries that I researched did have effects of both air pollution and water pollution, while there were other countries that did face specific issues like mangrove destruction in Indonesia and deforestation of the Amazon rainforest in Brazil. Another connective example that I noticed is that most governments acknowledge the fact that climate change exists, but they don't really have significant action that they're taking. And many of them have more general ideas that don't really outline specific action and are more just goals. Through this project, I learned a lot more about how climate change is affecting the world and what people are trying to do about it. This is really important because if climate change action is not prioritized now, it could become too late. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Clay. I would love to know a little bit more about what actually got you initially looking into climate change action. Was there something directly that inspired you?
I think just general incidents around the world, because I've noticed how climate change has become more and more prevalent in the news, how there have been more extreme weather patterns and natural disasters and temperature rises. And I think that that's become a bigger issue than it used to be. And that's interested me because I'm afraid that if nothing happens, it could be too late to fix eventually.
Absolutely. And what was the most interesting thing that you learned during the process?
I think the most interesting thing that I learned was actually what the governments are trying to do, because I knew that most governments weren't doing that much to fix climate action because they tend to take more performative seeming actions like joining agreements and vowing to reduce emissions and such. But I think the research just confirmed that, and I didn't realize how big of an issue that governments not doing anything was in contributing to climate change. And I think that that's really sad because governments have a lot of power that they could be using to invest in fixing issues like this, but instead they invest in things that only serve their own interests instead.
Absolutely correct. So it's a very interesting issue and it's a very complicated issue. So thank you so much for taking that on. Do you have any future directions that you want to lead into studying from your project?
I think so. I have a more general interest in global policy. For example, I do my school's Model UN Club, and I'm still interested in the news. And so I think in the future, I want to keep up with learning what different countries around the world are doing to fix other issues that include climate change, but other issues as well, like um, poverty or hunger and stuff like that.
Okay, wonderful. Now we have another question for you as well. We have a participant asking if you think this will affect the way that you see yourself voting in the future in politics.
I think so. I'm not old enough to vote yet, but I think when I am old enough to vote, I'm interested in to see what politicians are going to do about what climate change is doing to affect the earth, and choose what policies politicians are going to create that I think is most beneficial, because I'd rather vote for someone who wants to fix climate change over someone who doesn't really care about it or is supporting it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
And I'm going to call on our last presenter of the day, Ava Stern.
Hello. I apologize for not having the background, but I will share my screen. Okay, I hope this works. So my name is Ava. I live in Oakland, California, and my research paper was about urban forestry. So I studied urban forestry, which is a relatively new term that refers to the management of trees for their contribution to the physiological, sociological, and economic well-being of an urban society. As climate change persists and urbanization around the world continues, urban trees offer a variety of solutions to urban problems. They can reduce temperatures by providing shade, improve water quality, remove toxic particulate matter from the air, and increase property value. They can also reduce anxiety and depression among urban citizens and help sustain local biodiversity. And in my paper, I first assessed the current state of urban forestry globally. And I found that most cities have a canopy coverage ranging from high single digits to somewhere in the 20% range, which is displayed in this graph over here. Tampa, Florida actually has the highest urban tree cover in the world at 36% due to strict laws about tree removals and a well-funded tree services department. Oakland, where I live, has 21% tree coverage, so we still have some ways to go. In general, most cities around the world are trying to achieve 30% tree coverage in the coming decades, and government and non-governmental bodies alike seem to be ramping up their urban forestry efforts to achieve this goal. Prominent groups working in urban forestry around the world include the United Nations, the World Forum on Urban Forests, and the Arbor Day Foundation. So I use Oakland, California as the case study for my paper. I interviewed several government officials and relied on my own experience participating in grassroots urban forestry efforts, such as tree pruning on weekends and tree maintenance workdays that I organized. And I used those experiences to dive deep into the current state of Oakland's urban forest. I then created an original framework of success with several criteria, including periodic tree assessments and resources or programs to sustain our existing forests to evaluate Oakland. And my investigations revealed that while Oakland has been severely lacking in tree services after budget cuts cut the program in half in 2008, action is significantly revamping with the development of a 50-year urban forestry management plan, which will bring Oakland closer to meeting my own success criteria, but also more global goals like the 30% range. Oakland has actually never had a plan this comprehensive in its history. So far, it's only been working kind of in reactive mode. So the tree services takes action only when it's needed on specific cases. So I hope that this plan brings an onslaught of more permanent funding to urban forestry and prioritization of urban forestry throughout the city. And then another development is that relationships between grassroots organizers in Oakland, like myself, and the municipal government are also beginning to become stronger with the revamping of an Oakland Urban Forestry Forum. So in my research, I explore and identify tangible ways that urban forestry initiatives at all scales can improve. One of my favorite examples is the use of forums, as I've mentioned twice already. I really like forums because they increase the dialogue among stakeholders, and they're also just really flexible. So anyone at any capacity can organize a forum. And it's just a really great way to talk with each other about what is really needed in urban forestry, as opposed to a government creating programs that no one really wants. Another way to improve programs is by using public databases to keep track of tree inventory and health. And my favorite example is in Melbourne, Australia, where the city tracked their 80,000 trees on an easy-to-use website that identifies species and gives each tree a health rating. But most uniquely about this program is that they gave every single tree an email address so that citizens could write in about concerns or appreciation for specific trees. And in turn, this increased community engagement in the urban forestry and proved to the government just how much people cared, which ultimately led to the Melbourne politicians agreeing to strengthen their urban forestry goals and to increase funding. So lastly, my paper ultimately asserts that urban forestry is at an inflection point. It's quickly gaining worldwide prominence for its potential to address climate change and improve a multitude of issues facing urban life. It's really exciting to see the wealth of expertise and interests being harnessed in the creation of a lot of different urban forestry programs at the national or the international, national, state, and municipal levels. And as time goes on, it's important governments and outside groups stay diligent about maintaining and growing their urban forests. Consistent resources and implementation of new solutions at all levels are necessary. So while there are challenges to urban forestry, the prospect of a fuller canopy seems achievable and imperative. So that's what my research paper was about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again for sharing. I love that. And just so you know, I'm going to have to go look up these trees in Melbourne now. Being an Australian, that's really interesting, and I didn't even know that. So I think I'd love to know, based on what you have learned in this, where do you think is going to be the best point of attack now for the United States as a whole to improve their urban forestry efforts?
That's a very multifaceted question.
Yes.
I think from talking to a lot of people in the field, a lot of issues arise where governments like create these big planting initiatives, like the 1 million trees initiative. I think there's one in LA and then one in New York, which sound great, and like to the public, it's very appealing. But in reality, those are not that effective because they don't put enough resources into maintaining the trees, and then ultimately most of them die. So one of the things that I think is really important is that we maintain the trees that we already have. Because ultimately the mature trees are the ones that are going to be providing more benefits than the younger trees. So that's really important. I also think community engagement is really important, because once more people see the benefits of trees, they'll be more apt to pressure their governments to take action and to just create more collaborative action. At least for myself, once I delve into the world of urban forestry now, I'm like super passionate about it, and I do a bunch of things with it. So I think on a larger scale, that could be really helpful in the United States.
Okay, wonderful. Well, clearly you're very passionate about it. I want to know what's your own personal next step?
Well, I hope to study urban forestry in college. It is kind of a niche topic, so not a lot of colleges really have programs, but there are a lot of specialists around if you do enough digging, as my research revealed. I'm also just going to continue my urban forestry work in Oakland. I'm actually like part of the group that's organizing the Oakland Urban Forestry Forum, so we're trying to organize one in October, which is really exciting. And I also have do a bunch of tree maintenance work days, like I have one tomorrow. So I just want to keep up that work and get more high schoolers involved, especially as I go off to college next year.
Wonderful. So we've got a couple of attendees asking some great questions for you. What surprised you most in your research?
Well, I was surprised that Tampa, Florida is number one. I don't know Tampa that well, but yeah, go Florida. I think just really surprised me was how many resources there actually are out there. It is a niche subject, but there is a lot of work being done. A lot of the forums, the World Forum on Urban Forestry, I got into this database from the UN, and I just made a posting about needing interviews, and then a wealth of people just kept flooding my inbox. So there are just so many people out there who are working in urban forestry, and that honestly shocked me the most.
That's wonderful to hear that there are so many people out there who are so engaged in it. And I guess my last question here is, have you or do you intend to email a tree?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it would be valid for me to email a Melbourne tree, because I've never been there. But if Oakland did have emails for trees, I would definitely email trees. I think that's I just love that idea so much. And clearly it was so impactful in Melbourne. So yeah, I would definitely do it.
Wonderful. Well, I will tell you, I mean, I hope they do. I hope my hometown of Brisbane does. So it's something I think we need to spread around the world. Well, I wanted to thank everyone for being here with us today. We've had some amazing presenters, and I think I've certainly learned a lot. I hope everyone here has. I wanted to know really quickly before we close our session today, does anyone have any questions that they wanted to ask that have not been put forward today at all? It seems like we have some quiet, so it looks like we have a lot to think about and some great presenters. I do have to say I'm very proud of all of you. Everyone who's presented today has had some great ideas, some great learning, some great growth through their program. And I'm definitely want to encourage you to keep going, because you all have shown amazing directions, from individual psychology, from group psychology, from ecology. We have a really great future ahead of us with people like yourselves at the helm. So I do congratulate all of you and thank you for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.